inside one of Britain's highest security prisons, a place designed to keep the most dangerous criminals away from society. A murder happened that shocked even the people who had seen almost everything. But this was not a normal prison killing. The victim was not an innocent person. He was a convicted child killer, and the people who came for him were 3 convicted murderers. On November 4th, 2025, inside HMP Wakefield in West Yorkshire, a prison surveillance camera captured a moment that would later become the centre of a murder investigation. A man named Kyle Bevan walked down the corridor toward his cell. Seconds later, 3 men followed him: Mark Fellows, Lee Newell, and David Taylor. 3 prisoners, 3 killers, and 1 target. Less than 5 minutes later, they walked out, calm, relaxed, almost satisfied. Prosecutors would later tell the court they looked like men who had just completed a mission. But what happened behind that cell door would become one of the darkest prison murder cases in recent British history, because this was not a story about one criminal. It was a story about what happens when violence enters a place where violence already lives. A world where some prisoners believe they have the power to decide who deserves to survive. This is the story of the prison execution of Kyle Bevan, the victim, Kyle Bevan, before his death inside prison. Kyle Bevan was already one of the most hated inmates in the system. In 2020, a 2-year-old girl named Lola James died in Haverfordwest, Wales. The child had been in the care of adults who should have protected her. Instead, the case became a national tragedy. Kyle Bevan was later convicted for her death. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 28 years. He was 33 years old, and he entered prison knowing something important. Inside prison walls, not all crimes are treated equally. Among inmates, some offences create a different kind of hatred, and crimes involving children often place prisoners at the bottom of the hierarchy. Bevan was transferred to HMP Wakefield, a high-security prison holding some of Britain's most dangerous criminals, among them men who had their own histories of violence, men who had already taken lives. And eventually, 3 of those men would decide that Bevan's sentence was not enough. The 3 men who walked into the cell: Mark Fellows, the Dexter of Wakefield. The first man was Mark Fellows, 45 years old, a man already serving life imprisonment. Before his name became connected to the Wakefield murder, Fellows was known in the criminal world. He had been convicted for 2 gang-related murders. The media had given him a chilling nickname, the Dexter of Wakefield, a reference to the fictional character who lived a double life as a killer. Fellows was not considered a random violent offender. He was described as someone experienced with planning and carrying out attacks. Before Bevan's death, Fellows had reportedly wanted to leave HMP Wakefield. He had complained about conditions inside the prison. But before that request could change anything, events inside the prison would take a different direction, because someone else had become the target: Kyle Bevan. Lee Newell, a history that repeated itself. The second man was Lee Newell, 57 years old, and investigators discovered something disturbing. This was not the first time Newell had attacked a prisoner accused of harming a child. In 2013, Newell was sentenced to life imprisonment after killing another inmate. That victim had also been convicted of killing a child. The method was different, but prosecutors later highlighted similarities. The victim was attacked and left on a bed years later. A similar scene would unfold again. Another prisoner, another alleged act of revenge, another death behind bars. For investigators, the question was not just, did Newell kill again? The question was, what made him repeat this pattern? David Taylor, the most unpredictable. The third man was David Taylor, 64 years old. Taylor already had a long history of violence. At the time of the Wakefield killing, he was in prison for another murder. The victim was Alicia Apostoloff-Boyarin, a 24-year-old woman he had known. Her body was never found. Taylor eventually admitted responsibility, but his history went beyond murder. During his time in custody, he attacked a detective inside HMP Frankland using a homemade weapon. He stabbed Detective Darren Bratby during an interview. Taylor claimed he lost control. The jury did not accept that explanation. He was convicted of attempting to murder the officer. In court, Taylor described himself as An old-fashioned villain, a man who had always been involved in violence. And now he was inside another prison, with 2 other killers and a new target. The 5 minutes that changed everything. November 4th. The day Kyle Bevan died. The prison cameras recorded the beginning. Bevan entered his cell. Then Mark Fellows followed. Lee Newell followed. David Taylor followed. 3 men, 1 room. The door closed. For several minutes, nobody outside knew what was happening. There were no witnesses, no clear view inside, only the silence of a prison corridor. Then, the 3 men came out. The entire attack had lasted less than 5 minutes. But what happened afterward became important, because they did not look shocked. They did not appear afraid. Instead, prosecutors said they appeared pleased, almost as if something had been completed. Investigators would later say, inside the cell, Bevan was likely restrained. He suffered multiple stab wounds. At least 2 weapons were believed to have been involved. 1 weapon was later found. A piece of metal, modified into a homemade blade. It had blood matching Kyle Bevan. But the weapon responsible for the fatal injury was never recovered. The mystery remained. Who did what? And who delivered the final attack? A prison corridor. A locked cell. 3 convicted killers walking inside. And less than 5 minutes later, a man was dead. But the biggest question investigators faced was simple. What exactly happened during those 5 minutes? Because inside a prison, silence can be as powerful as evidence. There were no witnesses. No one could say exactly who held the weapon, who attacked first, who delivered the final blow. But investigators had something else, a trail of small details, and each one brought them closer to the truth. The camera that told the story. The CCTV footage became the foundation of the case. The camera did not record inside Kyle Bevan's cell, but it recorded everything before and everything after. The footage showed Bevan walking toward his cell, then Mark Fellows, Lee Newell, David Taylor, following behind him. They entered. The door closed. Minutes passed. Then the 3 men returned, calm, walking normally, like nothing unusual had happened. Prosecutors told the court that their behavior was significant. They were not panicking. They were not running. Instead, they appeared confident, almost satisfied. The court heard that they even appeared to shake hands and congratulate each other. For investigators, that moment became one of the most important pieces of evidence, because after a violent act, people often reveal themselves, not through words, but through behavior inside the cell. When officers entered Kyle Bevan's cell, they discovered the aftermath. Bevan had suffered multiple stab wounds. The injuries suggested he had been attacked with more than 1 weapon. The court heard that he may have been restrained, unable to escape, unable to defend himself. The attack was brutal, but the exact roles of the 3 men remained unclear. One question followed the entire investigation. Who was responsible for what? Was one man the leader? Were they all equally involved? Or did one person cross the final line? The prosecution argued that all 3 played a role, because all 3 entered, and all 3 left together. The bloody clues. Investigators searched for weapons. One piece of evidence was discovered near the scene. A homemade weapon, created from a piece of folded metal. It had blood traces matching Kyle Bevan. The weapon appeared to have been made inside the prison. A reminder that even behind locked doors, some prisoners find ways to create tools of violence. But there was another disturbing discovery. A hidden collection of homemade weapons was linked to David Taylor. Some were found concealed in unusual places, including inside a bottle of sauce in his cell. It raised another question. Had Taylor been preparing for violence, or was this simply another part of his prison life? The Iceman message. One of the most chilling moments came after the murder. As Taylor was being moved away from Wakefield prison, he reportedly shouted near Lee Newell, "Pleasure working with you and Iceman." Iceman was the nickname associated with Mark Fellows. To prosecutors, this sounded like more than a casual comment. It suggested teamwork, a connection between the 3 men, a shared understanding of what had happened. The defense argued that the evidence did not prove every detail, because nobody could see inside the cell. Nobody knew exactly who delivered which attack. But prosecutors focused on something bigger. The 3 men did not need to have identical actions. They needed to be part of the same deadly plan. David Taylor's past returns. During the trial, the court examined Taylor's history. He was not a first-time offender. He already had a conviction for killing Alicia Apostoloff-Boyarin. The woman's body was never found. Taylor had claimed for years that she was still alive. He even contacted police while imprisoned, saying he had new information. But during the meeting, the situation turned violent. Taylor attacked Detective Darren Bratby. Using a homemade metal weapon, he stabbed the officer. Taylor later said he had lost control, but the jury rejected that explanation. They believed it was an intentional attack. This history became important because prosecutors argued Taylor had demonstrated the ability to plan violence inside secure environments. The courtroom moment. During the trial for Kyle Bevan's murder, Taylor appeared by video link, but even that required special security. Officers wearing riot protection escorted him. Before he could sit, 2 sets of handcuffs had to be removed. The authorities were so concerned about his ability to hide weapons, they feared he might somehow have concealed one on himself. Searches were carried out. Nothing was found, but the atmosphere showed how dangerous officials believed he was. Mark Fellows and Lee Newell on trial. For Fellows and Newell, the evidence was different. Fellows already had a life sentence. Newell already had a history of killing another prisoner. The prosecution painted a picture. 3 men, 3 violent backgrounds, 1 victim. A person hated by many inside the prison. But hate alone was not enough. The jury needed proof, and after hearing the evidence, they reached their decision. All 3 men were found guilty of murdering Kyle Bevan. The final question before sentencing. The case now moved to sentencing, but the judge faced an unusual situation. These men were already among the most dangerous prisoners in Britain. They were already serving life sentences. So what punishment could truly change anything? The answer: another life sentence, a separate sentence, a legal statement that this murder was another crime, another victim, another act of violence. Judge Maura McGowan delivered new life sentences for Fellows, for Newell, and for Taylor. Taylor also received additional sentences connected to his previous crimes. The message was clear. Even inside prison, murder carries consequences. A prison is supposed to be the place where society takes control, a place where dangerous people are separated from the public, a place where punishment is decided by the law. But inside the walls of HMP Wakefield, something else happened. 3 men who had already taken lives decided that another prisoner deserved to die. Kyle Bevan entered prison with a life sentence, but he never completed it, because before the justice system could decide his final fate, other prisoners made their own decision, and that creates the biggest question of this case. Was this justice, or was it simply another murder? The psychology of prison revenge. Inside prisons, there is an unofficial hierarchy. Not every crime is viewed the same way. Some prisoners are feared, some are respected, and some become targets. Crimes involving children often create intense reactions among inmates, even among people who have committed serious crimes themselves. For some prisoners, attacking someone like Kyle Bevan becomes a way to gain status, a way to send a message, a way to show power. But psychologists studying prison violence often point out something darker. Violence does not disappear inside a prison. It can become concentrated. A person who has used violence before may see violence as the solution to every problem. And in an environment where control and reputation matter, a violent act can become a form of communication. 3 men, 3 different motives. The prosecution believed the 3 men acted together, but their personal reasons may have been different. For Mark Fellows, it may have been about reputation, a man already known for organized violence, a person who had built a dangerous identity. For Lee Newell, the case carried a disturbing similarity. Years earlier, he had killed another inmate who had harmed a child. A pattern appeared, a belief that he had the right to punish others. For David Taylor, the picture was different. A man with a long history of violence, a person who had attacked even while surrounded by prison security. Together, they created a dangerous combination. Experience, anger, and opportunity. The question of responsibility, one of the most difficult parts of the case, was that nobody outside the cell knew exactly what happened. The camera captured the beginning. The camera captured the ending, but not the 5 minutes in between. The court never received a complete picture of every movement. Who held the weapon first? Who caused the fatal injury? Who planned the attack? Those questions may never have a complete answer. But the jury decided something important. All 3 men were involved. All three entered together. All three left together. And Kyle Bevan was dead. A prison without escape. The irony of this case is difficult to ignore. The victim was already imprisoned. He had no way to leave, no way to disappear, no way to avoid his sentence. The prison was supposed to be the one place where he was protected. Instead, it became the location of his death, a locked building, surrounded by security. And yet a murder still happened. The sentence. The judge gave each man a new life sentence, not because they were likely to walk free, but because the law recognized another life had been taken, another family had been affected, another crime had been committed. The punishment was not just about keeping them behind bars, it was about recording what happened. A permanent mark on their criminal history. The final reflection. This case leaves behind an uncomfortable question. When someone who has committed a terrible crime is killed by other criminals, some people see revenge. Some people see a form of prison justice. But the law sees something else. A killing. Because if every person decides who deserves punishment, then justice becomes impossible to control. The difference between justice and revenge is who has the authority to decide. And inside HMP Wakefield, 3 prisoners made that decision themselves. The result? Another victim. Another murder. Another case added to the endless cycle of violence. Ending low music. Kyle Bevan was convicted for a horrific crime. Mark Fellows, Lee Newell, David Taylor were convicted for another. 4 names, 4 crimes, and 1 prison cell that revealed something disturbing. Sometimes the most dangerous place for a criminal is not outside the walls, it is inside. This was Casevault, where every crime has a story, but every story leaves behind questions. Subscribe for more true crime investigations.